A picturesque blue water harbor, tranquil and idyllic, the gentle nutmeg scent of tropical breezes. But soon the island of Grenada would find itself embroiled in a struggle to preserve the rights and freedom of its people. By October 1983, the threat of communism ran rampant. Virtually every wall carried a revolutionary slogan. The suffocating presence of Fidel Castro, North Korea, and the Soviet Union would only be fully realized after the successful intervention of the United States.
What's the purpose of it? Capitalism would not collapse if Grenada remained revolutionary. And Reagan was right. It wasn't a matter of direct resources that you needed from that country. He said, nutmeg is not the question. I mean, that was Grenada's biggest export. We could get perfectly good nutmeg from Africa. You don't need Grenada's nutmeg. So why did they invade Grenada? They invaded Grenada because they were serving notice to the people of the Caribbean and to the people of Latin America and to the people of the world that you cannot drop out of your client state free market system. That if you try to take an independent source, and that if you use your land, your labor, your resources, and your capital, and your markets in a different way, in a collectivist way, if you use them to benefit the needs of your people rather than to be milked like a cow for foreign investors, if you do that, this is what's going to happen to you.
All right. So today I'm going to be talking about Ukraine, Venezuela, Central America, a few other things, Russia's supposed nuke that is powered by nuclear propulsion, which we'll get into a little bit of the weeds about that and why I don't think it makes any sense. It's odd behavior to, we'll get into that a little bit later. But so today I was listening to an interview with Max Blumenthal. I believe it was on Glenn Deason. And generally, Max, he does a lot of good reporting, but obviously he's a leftist. And I wasn't crazy about his reporting on Brazil a while back. But he does know a good amount about South American politics, but obviously he's going to skew quite a bit to the left about his leanings on how he reports it. But I believe if you have a couple of brain cells, you can see the correlation between Venezuela and what's happening right now in Grenada. I think Venezuela serves a few different purposes. One I was thinking about today is maybe a little bit off the wall, but I think it makes sense as far as, for instance, why we go into Central America. Well, why we've been building a presence in Central America, particularly in Panama, which is kind of the middle between the extreme points of Mexico and South America as far as the border of Mexico and the U.S. and South America. Very odd that it just so happens that they get a Jewish woman in control of Mexico. So that end is under the control and ready to be used against us or go the opposite way, south, if we cooperate. And I'll get into the voting, why I feel that voting matters to them. And I remember hearing people say, why, if voting didn't matter, they wouldn't let you do it. And there's a reason I was thinking about the voting mattering is the reason voting matters and why they let you do it is because you're legally consenting to what they do, what your leader does. So your vote doesn't necessarily matter. It's your consent that matters. These people are essentially vampires. You have to let the vampire into the house, and then they can go and control. They can continue to do their nefarious plans. And so, on the topic of voting, one reason that we're being given as an excuse as to why Trump is not very happy with Venezuela is that now he's making the claims that Dominion voting systems, which have heavy ties to Venezuela, are the reason that the voting was rigged and he lost the election to Biden. Make of that what you will. I know that also back years and years ago, Glenn Beck did a really excellent breakdown on he had like 5 different long ass chalkboards explain the timeline of our involvement in Ukraine. And that also tied into, was it Dominion? What's the other one that it's a program that a lot of companies use? I remember at my previous job, it went down, and who knows if it was hacking or what, but it went down and it had ties to Ukraine, and it's basically like a big conglomerate of information and systems that run off of it. So let's get back onto the topic of Venezuela. So not only is he, pissy about saying he lost the election, but then now the woman that has they gave the Nobel Prize to, or were nominating for it, is out of Venezuela, and she is promoting the invasion of her own country. And Trump, I feel like this is a carrot and the stick thing of, well, they're kind of maybe rubbing it in his face, but the person that they gave it to is on his side or wants to have his support in, it is basically giving consent to invade her own country, even though the leader of Venezuela previously had offered to let America drill Maduro. He had offered to basically give the rights away to open up the economy for drilling. But the problem is that they don't want that to happen because it's one of the largest oil reserves. It's not quite as good of oil as they have in the Middle East, but from what I've heard, it's not really. It's still economically viable. It's never not economically viable, especially when this is one of the largest findings of oil on the planet. And it's kind of offshore, if I remember. And the reason that oil and these resources are really important is because countries like ours in this World Bank, IMF system, they use it as capital, especially when their own governments and their economies are not doing well. They use it as leverage and capital against a loan to continue pushing the problem down the road. And it's a Ponzi scheme because what it's like is it's like multi-level marketing, where the people who are the best at this multi-level marketing have a bunch of underlings thinking that they're going to get to where you're at if you're up high on the MLM. And so we've kind of fallen into the trap of our own system where before it was we would just go to the poorer countries and exploit them. But now, much like in like Ghostbusters, we're that little like evil sidekick that allowed the monster in the painting to come to life. And we thought that as long as we were good towards the monster, that it would take care of us. Or like in Aladdin, where like the guy gets like the genie powers and it goes against him. And these people, they think that it's so stupid. They're doing a deal with evil and thinking that as long as they're good towards evil, that they'll get rewarded. And that's not how it happens. Like, what did you do? You had people under you and you exploited them, saying that they thought that you were going to go and reward them. So why didn't you think that the IMF and the World Bank, the Bank of London, the City of London were ever going to go and reward you for your good deeds? You're not even a pet. You're just something to be just left in the ruin. So they're trying to get consent and have a revolution in Venezuela. They've tried it multiple times, and they did it in Panama and in Central America, where I was thinking about today why it's so important that they had to go down there. And the reason it's like crabgrass. A lot of times, if you have a yard, you'll get crabgrass on the very extremities. But then sometimes, if it pollinates, then you start getting it in really weird sections, like in the middle of the yard. And it's a very difficult problem to take care of. Either you're going to pull all of it, or you're going to have to use some kind of heavy treatment that poisons everything. And so what I think is happening is you put these people into, let's say, Panama, and you have them grow an economy there. You have rich people come move there. You have intelligence. And not only do they, procreate and grow that little community, but then on top of that, when they're there, and the more of them that there is, you kind of have a situation like you did with Israel and the hostages, is they use it as reason to exterminate you and commit an atrocity, a genocide, or whatever against you if you even put them in any kind of threat. And so it's kind of like the way that my opinion is on the Jewish community, whereas a lot of people in that community think that because they're part of this group, that they're shielded, and they, even Catholics do it too, is you feel like you're part of the group, and the top makes you feel like you're part of this group, but all you are is cannon fodder. And so, going back to Venezuela, you have a bunch of people that are willing to exploit their own people and be the little parasite. It's just very odd, the kind of leader that they elected in Mexico, or the leader that they elected that they didn't even elect, they installed Zelensky in Ukraine, and somehow it ends up in the elimination of Christians, particularly white Christians in Ukraine. And so, going back to why the oil is important in Venezuela, they're taking out loans against that, and because previously the bond market right now is not great. Nobody wants to buy our bonds. China has been selling them off slowly. They can't do it all immediately because that'll crash it for them. It's like if like a whale in a stock or a crypto sells all of his stuff, you have a peak, but then it dumps really quickly because then it sends a signal to either all the bots that are monitoring it or all the people that are going to know that even further down the line and so you're just exponentially losing money if you do it immediately. But if you do it gradually, then you can kind of stutter that a little bit. So we're not having a good option, no pun intended, of doing the bonds. And what it's like is when people on 4chan years ago, I remember on the biz section, were taking out loans to go and buy crypto. And so what you're doing is you're gambling that the percentage that you have to pay back of the loan is going to be dramatically less than the return of taking out that money and investing it somewhere. And so some of those guys were doing great during the bull rush, but unfortunately that happens right now, is that everybody knows, like even normies are starting to see that the economy is flailing. And it's essentially the same thing as if you did a call option and, let's say you had a call option on Papa John's, and then all of a sudden the CEO of Papa John's ends up saying the N-word, not even in a bad way, saying that like it's not a good thing, and just completely drop the entire stock. So we're on top of that, Venezuela is now kind of seeking help from Russia. And Russia, it was weird last week, and I didn't understand it. And I thought I was, maybe my science memory is not as great as I thought it was. But last week, Russia was claiming to have a nuclear propelled missile, which to me doesn't make any sense. But, I'm not a rocket scientist. And so I was like, well, the only possibilities I can think of making it work just seem too outlandish. And I'll play a quote from Douglas McGregor explaining it, which made me feel less crazy. Doug McGregor is a really great analyst. He's a military background, Colonel Douglas McGregor. He goes on a lot of different shows, and you may remember, I think he wasn't on it, but the guy that I'm playing, Daniel Davis, had a breakdown on the Oreshnik missile, which was a ballistic missile that previously they started displaying. So let me go ahead and play this really quick.
Most Americans are happy to stand there and let Donald Trump bloviate. They don't care. Doesn't make any difference to them. Only a few people who pick this apart, as we just have, say, well, this is crazy. Now, let's go back to, you were talking about the Poseidon and the other unpronounceable, supposedly nuclear-powered nuclear missile. The Poseidon is real. There's no question about that. That is a very dangerous weapon. I think the Chinese are working on similar things at sea. We don't need to go to that right now. But remember, they're also dual purpose. They can be conventional or nuclear.
Yeah.
This nuclear-powered missile, I've got a lot of problems with that. And I am not, I was one of these involuntary engineers at West Point. As far as I was concerned, when we were studying thermodynamics, I went to entropy quite early. I didn't like any stuff. I thought I was wasting my time in most cases because it was just another course with a series of equations, and the man who was better at solving equations than anybody else, he was number one. Okay, fine, great. Completely irrelevant to the conduct of anything in military affairs, in my judgment, but that's the old West Point. What I'm trying to say is that looking at this, I don't know how you account for the heat, the radiation. I don't know how you convert all of that into some sort of mobile propulsion inside this missile that's designed to sort of fly around for thousands of kilometers. I don't know. So I have a lot of trouble with it. And people that I trust who know a great deal more about engineering than I do have all told me, Doug, it's crap. Okay. So I don't know what the Russians fielded, but this business of nuclear propulsion in the air, I don't think so. I think it's nonsense. But the Poseidon is real. And I don't know why the Russians even need to worry about it, because the Oreshnik is a very powerful weapon, the likes of which we have never seen, and we have nothing to match it. But again, you're dealing with the Russians, who feel they have to respond to every dumb idea and every dumb remark that comes out of Washington. I wish somebody in Washington, I wish the president would do this, because I know this is the way he feels. Just simply tell everybody, look, there will be no nuclear war between us and Russia or China or anybody else. We don't want it. We're not going to go there. It's out of the question. He could do that very easy. It's not difficult at all for him to do that, because I know that's how the man feels. I mean, whatever you want to say about President Trump, makes a lot of these offhanded remarks. He is not interested in a nuclear war with anyone. So let's drop all that nonsense and stop talking about it. And that's why the Secretary of Energy, confided, I guess it was he, I don't remember now, who confided to a journalist, forget it. We're not testing any nuclear devices. It's not happening. Let's come out and just say that's off the table. I misspoke. I was talking about missiles. Okay, fine. And as you point out, you can test whatever missiles you want to your heart's content.
Yeah, let's hope that's
Okay. So so the reason I believe that he's saying this doesn't make sense, how it would work, is that regular missiles, they go and they use a fuel, and the way that nuclear power works is it's kind of a solid component, and so what it does is it radiates heat, and then they use that radiation to drive steam engines, which are really that's one of the most efficient ways of generating power is steam. And so you generate power with steam, and you use water that's constantly either by you got these pools, and usually they'll make them by a water source, because nuclear power is not so much really dirty. You can capture all of the remnants and the residue at the bottom of these pools, and technically, you could actually go into the pools and be unaffected, because it all kind of sinks to the bottom, and it doesn't really float around. So it kind of gets captured. But with that, you have to have constantly cooling off, and you have an excess of energy. That energy has to go somewhere. Either it has to be sold off and stored somewhere, or it has to be expelled. And so with rockets and missiles, the way that they work is kind of like the same concept as a turbo on a car, or the turbo jet. Jet works by recirculating the excess of the jet engine, and then pulling in fuel. The fuel is actually what cools down the engine as it sucks through there. It's maintaining like a cooling effect, and then it gets burned, and kind of like an exhaust with a turbo. You're using the previously hot air and sucking it back through there, cooling it down through a radiator. But that's kind of the function of it. So if you have a nuclear device, which is basically kind of a dry component, you can take energy, you can make explosions, like, you add potassium or you add different dry chemicals to each other, and they do propel, but you have to have a way to cool that down, and it just doesn't really work if you have like the way that nuclear power works for bombs is you have two components come together and explode after being ignited by like a third party. So there's not really a way to make that work. I don't know where you're going to be pulling a cooling mixture through the missile, especially if it can go in an indefinite or like a very long journey and kind of hover or sit in the atmosphere is what they're claiming. Which is very odd for the Russians to go and make a claim like that. I don't know if this is their new strategy because I don't believe that anybody really wants to go to nuclear war. It just doesn't really make sense. If you remember back when they had that big explosion from that volcano in Europe, that volcano exploded and then the cloud traveled. And that's exactly why, let's say, even if Israel has nukes, they're not going to use them on Iran because the settlement from the clouds is going to come back at you. It's going to travel through the air. And the other thing about nukes that I'm not quite sure about, but they always talk about how we have these stockpiles of warheads. Well, nuclear powered devices, one of the things, let's say for power plants, is you're having to cycle out those cores because of the very quick half-life of radioactive material. That's why it's so powerful, is because the half-life is so short. And so I don't know what good it would do for you to assemble a bunch of warheads and then have it sit there and have a half-life shorting out exponentially. So that kind of doesn't make sense to me. But then when I was thinking about, I'm of the opinion that the moon landing was completely a hoax. You may not feel the same, but I used to think that was ridiculous until I started actually looking into it myself and seeing all the flaws. I mean, it's just so ridiculous that they would go and say that, they lost the technology. They lost a technology that's less powerful than what we have in a cell phone today. And then they have these magic stories of, a guy calculating on the window to come back home, to propel himself back home. I think NASA and all of these government contracts that are being now given to Elon as far as, getting to Mars and then, having these rockets that can come back down. I think what that is what the Russians just started describing about how they have this missile that can hover almost indefinitely in the sky and then, be used later on. I think it's the same as Elon Musk's rockets where they can launch up and then come back down and land. I think that's what they're threatening with. And the best way to make a guise of, you don't have to have, that the warhead works. That works. That's not the question. It's the delivery of the warhead. And so that's, I believe, what they're doing with all of these missile companies, these rocket companies, because they're not going to space. They're looking for long-term options to keep these things almost like a satellite, like a hand of God coming down. I believe that's the name of that weapon, where they supposedly have like tungsten rods that they can drop from the sky, which is pretty evil, I guess. So let me go ahead and play this clip of another guy that I really like off of Glenn Deason's show. He does a bunch of podcasts. His name's Alex Craner. He's kind of an economist, and I agree with probably 95% of the things that he says, which is very rare for me to like find somebody that, okay, he's really good on this topic and I'll listen to him on this, but I'm not listening to him to other stuff. But for the most part, even when I thought I disagreed with him, I started to think about things, you know, that he said and they actually made sense. I think he had too much hope, I think, for Trump's rationalities, but he's pretty on the ball with a lot of stuff. So this is Alex Craner.
Well, very nearly everything that the European side is doing is counterproductive. But we have to, these things are neither surprising nor unpredictable if you correctly diagnose what is the nature of this conflict and who are the stakeholders at the opposed sides. And so, as you and I have discussed it before, it's the conflict between two systems of governance. And that is basically the conflict between the European oligarchic imperialist system that is always directed towards creating colonies and basically colonial plunder, opposed to pretty much everybody else, including the domestic populations of Western European countries. And then we have to understand who the stakeholders are. It's the money-lending oligarchies who are driving this neo-colonialist system of governance. And to them, not only Russia, not only China, Iran, other Middle Eastern nations, but all of humanity to them is prey. They are the predator and everybody else is the prey. So, in order for them to preserve their hold on power, their dominance and hegemony around the world, they will absolutely willingly sacrifice the domestic economies and societies of Germany, France, Great Britain, the United States, Canada. It doesn't matter. So as they're failing to score victory in Ukraine, which is pretty much, I think, their number one priority conflict, battleground in the world today, they are doubling down more and more and more, and they are depleting the domestic societies where they are based, right? Their host societies. So we see the economy of Germany, of France, of Britain, of the United States, Italy, and so forth. They're absolutely collapsing, and the people they have put in power absolutely don't care. All they talk about is Ukraine. All they talk about is going to war to Russia, against Russia. And so that's not difficult to predict. That is, the obvious thing that they will do, because they don't have a different business model. They're not interested in reverting to managing individual sovereign nations as, independent, neutral economies and societies, and crafting policies around improving the standards of living and prosperity and employment and industrial output and all of these nice things. We see that in Russia, we see that in China, we see that in other places, but across the West, we are uniformly slipping into something that looks more and more like naked fascism. And so everything is subordinated to the interests of the banking oligarchies and to their corporate clients. And so this is, now the outcomes are becoming undeniable, even though the symptoms were there for several decades, whoever wanted to pay attention. And then I think that all of those people who think that we are the good side and that the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians and so forth are the bad side, I think that we've come to a point of biblical inversion. We were warned, woe to those who call good evil and who call evil good, because they are creating a lot of these evil outcomes. And then, another warning was from, I think, was it Goethe, who said, none are so so blind as those who willfully will not see the truth. And I think that people who are close to power in Europe and in the United States, to a large extent, they deliberately don't want to see the truth. They want to persist in this path of self-destruction, and they will go until either the system collapses or they're taken out of power by popular revolutions.
So I have one more clip of him talking, but one, it reminds me also of when I used to go to church for a while. I remember I was really taking it seriously, and I had become a new Christian. I still have struggles with calling myself a Christian. I feel like the Bible has been stained, possibly, or had parts that were made subversive to use against the people that are very pissed off to this day and keep sending Christians or their ilk to the meat grinder for speaking up against this kind of stuff. And the thing that I remember telling one of the elders at the church, I said, I finally understand why lying is to me, one of the biggest sins in the world, and why it's such a bad sin. It might be one of the worst, is because when you start lying, you are creating your own universe. And what that does is that you're essentially trying to play God. And that's what these people are doing. And it's no wonder that this certain country is named after a term that says that's to struggle with God as their homeland of liars and deceit, and why they're in control of everything. Because, as I've discussed before, what I believe why money is the root of all evil is that it's been used as an exchange for your time. Essentially, what you're doing is you're trading in time. But what happened is it used to be a 1-for-1, and this I don't want to start sounding like a Marxist, because it's exactly like it is kind of Marxist idealism, but it's like a 1-for-1 trade and not having any profit. But what you're doing is you're trading your time for a currency that you can carry around and trade it for someone else. And did you make the best use of your time? So that's where you have the negatives and the losses that you can account for, and then making profit. And so what happened is when you go off of the gold standard, the golden rule, is that you start creating money out of thin air, which is lies. And you're playing God, and you're performing alchemy, and making your own world, and basically acting like you're time traveling and selling people nothing. So I know it's kind of an outlandish kind of way of looking at it, but that's kind of the way that I perceive it. So the problem in Venezuela is that the leaders, the Maduro, much like, we have plenty of leaders that go and invest back in their country, who are still committing awful atrocities against their own people. They accuse the sheiks of having slavery, but what is it? What's the difference when you go to school to go into debt to pay, and then you take debt so that you can go to school to eventually pay off that debt, and then finally in the hope of coming out from that debt. And we see what happens when these countries go and take out debt of their own resources and not starting their own businesses, much like a person who becomes a tradesman and doesn't take out debts. They just only learn and go into the business directly. They start essentially what they'll call as the client state free market, is what Michael Parenti was calling it at the beginning. And he is a socialist. It's kind of counter to a lot of things that I believe. I believe that socialism versus the crony capitalism right now, where we're funding proxy wars, it's hard. I mean, at least we would have them reinvesting the money into roads. I don't like the school systems being run by government, but at least go back into your own infrastructure and start industrializing it. Michael Hudson, going back to Glenn Deason, who I just played, Michael Hudson has a couple of really good hour or two interviews with Glenn Deason where he explains the transfer from industrial capitalism to financial capitalism that started with the Industrial Revolution, and then having the countries slip into, like, the head players of the MLMs, these multi-level marketing scams of global banking. What they do is they go and transfer from having the industry in their own country and then moving it to other countries so that they can be a financial capitalist. And it's really ridiculous when they say that the resources, they're always after oil, or they're always after resources. They couldn't give a shit what it is that you're trading, but they have to have something of value to back up these loans. Because remember, just a normal bank can lend out a 9-to-1 ratio of what they have on the books. Imagine what it is when you print out the money yourself, or you're lending out the money. I mean, this is unworldly amounts of money that are not even accounted for. You couldn't even possibly understand. I can't even understand that number. And so you have this move to take out loans, and I believe it was Alex Craner was talking about, he estimated that the value of the futures, the future betting, which is what it would be, of the oil deposits in Venezuela offshore, equal to about $6 trillion. So if you can go and say, well, you have $6 trillion sitting here that hasn't been mined, but it's in the future, over time, it's worth $6 trillion. You can use that as a hedge against your failing bond market, as I said before, where China was purchasing our debt, and they're kind of getting out and going into the BRICS, which a lot of these countries are doing. That's why it's so important, as I've said before, and it finally made sense after I heard a guy named Tom Luongo on Clint Russell's podcast a while ago talk about how Ukraine is so important because France, Germany, and Britain and much of the EU, they're in, as I'll play in the next clip, I believe, in an unbelievable amount of debt. What's on numbers in public is an unbelievable amount of debt to their GDP. But what they don't say is probably way worse. And so they need to keep Ukraine because it's not the resources that are there. It's the idea of the resources. That's like the same way that a bank can lend out, a 9-to-1 ratio, with only having 10% on the books, and which is your money that you're never going to go pull all of it out. You're constantly cycling it out. And so that's why they had those laws back in the day where you couldn't pull out your money or you couldn't own gold, is because they didn't want everybody pulling out their money in exchange for gold, or robbing, not even robbing, actually they're robbing you, is getting your actual money back. I remember back when I had at one point 6 figures in my bank account, and I remember doing a lot of traveling, and at one point I would take out like $10,000 in cash often, and the bank wouldn't let me just do it. They would sit me in a room, and I had Merrill Lynch come up to me and like talk to me about, like, why don't you just invest this money? And they really don't want you pulling out large amounts of money. They want you making purchases, but they don't want you just pulling it out in cash. They don't want you have to drop out of like you're just a little tiny like tentacle off of, or little branch or root off of this giant tree. But like if everybody started cutting off, roots, and you finally get to the taproot of the tree, well, the tree is going to die. So that's what they really don't like to allow. So let me go ahead and play this clip of Alex again.
But it seems like we're deterring Russia now from aggressive reaction as well, because in the same breath, he wants to steal the Russian sovereign funds. He wants to seize the Russian ships in the Baltic Sea, so-called the Shadow Fleet, advocating for long-range missiles supplied by the West, likely operated by Western countries, to strike inside Russia. But we have to deter the Russians. This is also why we need...
That was another thing, too, that I noticed, and I can't remember if I already said this or not. The other important reason I believe that we have to have multiple wars is that, so right now we're publicly sending Marines over to Venezuela. They said that they've got 6,000 people, and from what I've heard, like half of that is not even going to be mobilized. Those are people that are operating the vessels. So it's more of a true figure of like 3,000, which you're expecting 3,000 troops to go into a country that's like exponentially more advanced now than Vietnam was. We lost 10,000 people probably to wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran, not Iran, is it Syria? But all of those ventures. So 3,000 people, as much as Marines think that they're tough and they can, 6 Marines could take down this whole city. No, they're not, especially not in a jungle. So what they need, these public wars where they actually have on the books our troops there, is that it explains to, I think, family members or people that are associated, when you get a person KIA and they were over in Ukraine illegally operating an MK-41 missile platform that were not on the books of actually sending troops into combat against Russia, because then I'm surprised that Russia hasn't even made a bigger deal about this, but that and they're being very patient. If we get caught, that fully escalates it, and then it goes back to this thing of consent. Because right now we're just sending white Christians from Ukraine into the meat grinder against Russia, and Russia's actually kind of had enough, because before they were going and giving the option to surrender and or giving them a way out of the invasion. But now I forgot what city it was, but now they've got it completely surrounded, and they've told them you either surrender or we're going and completely devastating it. And it's unfortunate because you have a lot of people that are young men and old men being sent to fight. They're being stolen off the street, and as young as or fresh as a week of training into, because they just need bodies, and they want to get rid of when you invade a country, or you take over, you rape the women, you kill the men, and then you take the children as slaves. That's the old way of doing it. And so you have to get rid of the men. That's what they did in World War II. That's why Europe is such a cucked situation, is because they exterminated most of the high testosterone military-aged men. They did that with our country as well. I was just recently out. My daughter I wanted to take her trick-or-treating. So we took her out, and there was one of the places we went was like a college, kind of a heavily college area. A lot of college students were involved. And the amount of transgenders and single moms with mixed kids there, I mean, that was 90% of the people. I literally saw, when I walked in, I'm not even making this up, 3 furries and a single mom that was just awful, like super high, like booty shorts, but she was just looked like she was she had the body type of the Eggman from Sonic. And that was most of the people there. I felt so disgusted taking my daughter there to be in the presence of these furries. I may have said something in German as I passed by them that I won't say here, but they it really reminded me of what the boys look like that are left over or being produced by the men that we have in this country, or the families, or being raised by single moms. And I will give credit to the Black community for, they do have a gripe when it comes to being raised by single moms and having that exploited against them. Although I'm very much, as we've seen recently with this EBT, it's just another example of how they're used as a weapon and a distraction. Because if the government doesn't solve the issue and they don't get their free money, then they get to go and burn things down or steal, while you have to keep propelling this economy that's being against you. That was a long enough tangent. Let me go ahead and let Alex talk.
it's really crackpot crazy talk here, but I guess, yeah, towards this end, I very much agree. I think something's going to crack, something's going to blow up, but either we're going to end up in a direct war with the Russians. For some reason, they expect this to be our tank columns versus theirs. I don't think they foresee that Oreshniks will, rain upon our cities. But putting this aside, what would you look for the alternative? If it's not war, then as you said, we can't continue like this. Something's going to crack.
That's another danger too, is that the thing with Iran is they kicked Israel's ass, and their missile systems, they invested heavily into drones and missiles. And we saw how quickly Israel's defense systems got used up, and they're not going to be able to resupply it. And that's why they had to broker this peace. Same thing with Qatar, or was it Qatar? Not Qatar. The Houthis, when they, brokered peace deals with them, is because we got our asses kicked because we were using $150,000 weapon systems versus $5,000 to $10,000 drones to take them out. So,
in the economy, do you have your eyes on any specific indicators? I mean, talking currency problems, stock market. What are you looking at?
Well, I think that I'm primarily concerned about the bond markets in Europe. The British and European bonds, German, French, Italian, and British. Germany is the largest economy in the European Union. France is the second largest economy in the European Union. Their fiscal position is, as well as the British one, they're in a catastrophic state. They've all gone. Well, France has gone beyond 100% debt to GDP, and I'm virtually 100% certain that the numbers that we know are probably also false. That the situation is much, much worse. For example, when Keir Starmer came to power, then they made the whole theater about how he discovered a 22 billion pound black hole in the government's accounts. Except when he was in opposition, he was talking about first, I think, 36 billion pound black hole, and then some months later he was talking about 67 billion black hole, and then after that he immediately corrected himself and he said it's not 67, it's 76. So when he was in opposition and he was, they were looking at these figures to attack Rishi Sunak's cabinet, they knew the number. It was $76 billion black hole. As soon as he was in power, suddenly the black hole shrunk to 22 billion without any explanation. And so I think that we are being deceived by authorities in France and in Germany and elsewhere. And so the situation is absolutely unsustainable, and it's deteriorating. It's only getting worse. The people who should be trying to mitigate the crisis are completely absent without leave. They're completely as you said, it's all first Russia, second Ukraine, third defense spending, fourth Russia again, and so forth. There's no discussion about improving competitiveness. Mario Draghi, more than a year ago, wrote a report about European competitiveness. And since then, nothing much has happened. You said correctly that all the Western tech corporations are in fact American tech corporations. Americans have a stranglehold on high technology in the Western world. And Europe not only doesn't have the corresponding contenders, they have even made their life so miserable that the ones that do emerge from out of Europe eventually end up moving to the United States. Like for example, Spotify. Spotify was a very successful European venture, started in Sweden, and they remained for as long as they could. And then in the end, they said, like, sorry, but this is ridiculous. We're moving our business to the United States, where the system is much more hospitable to successful entrepreneurs. In Europe, if you're a successful entrepreneur, you end up punished for your success. In the United States, you get rewarded. So in the whole European system is practically now it's devolved to self-imposed headwinds. And in the end, if Europe continues like this, it's going to become a tourist resort and a museum for visitors from around the world, which is something. But you're not even going to have that if you think your most important project now is going to war against Russia.
So, next, let's see. I'm going to play, since he was actually talking about Scandinavian countries, I want to play this kind of older clip that that was the Finnish leader, or was it the Finnish president? I believe it's the Finnish president, who it's very odd when you hear the first part of this conversation and then you hear how it ends. And I'm Finnish, like 50% Finn. My mom's almost, I think, 100% Finnish. And Finland is getting punished right now because they had a female president who was absolutely a laughingstock, like just a complete joke of a leader. And they joined NATO, and they had a history in World War II where they were fighting against the Allies, and then they got invaded and got basically served for doing that. And so I think they're kind of in this situation where Germany is still paying debts. They're kind of in the situation where they had basically got George Soros into oblivion. It used to be one of the most prosperous, sought-after countries to live in. Very complex group of people that have one of the highest suicide rates, but also the highest indicator of happiness. That's what Finns are like. But anyways, here's the leader of Finland talking to Biden.
We are really living very difficult times. I want to thank you also for...
I'm sorry, don't think I have the... There we go.
For the leadership you have showed. We need it now. Our thoughts today undoubtedly are with the Ukrainian people who are fighting bravely for their country. And we do our best to help them. Like you, Mr. President, said, we have a long-lasting partnership, very good relations, and I hope that during this meeting and discussion we can strengthen them more between the United States and Finland and the Nordic countries altogether. Thank you, Mr. President.
Well, you know, my predecessor who sat in this seat, President Obama, used to say, we'd be all right if we left everything to the Nordic countries. We'd be fine.
Well, we usually don't start wars.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Well, we usually don't start wars. It's so interesting to say that and then go along with the plan, is that just these people are all hostages, and that guy has no choice but to flatter that incompetent moron who is one of the worst people on the planet. We're down one worse person. Dick Cheney apparently died. So rest in piss, asshole. And so let me play one more clip because I think I've discussed most of what I wanted to talk about. Let's see. Oh, this was another thing that I've discussed before that it's very important, and you'll understand a lot of what's going on right here. This is the north-south corridor that is being built, and you can see all of these BRICS countries, and these are all countries that were in conflict with that are traveling around that red line. And previously, the way that oil found its way around was going around the peninsula of the was it the Strait of Hormuz, around Saudi Arabia and Yemen. I believe that's Yemen down there. I always forget. And then coming up through the Suez Canal and traveling up to through the Baltic after going through the Mediterranean. And now India can get its oil from Iran. Moscow can get its oil from Iran, and they can all tie their funds together and not be tied to the OPEC, which is even OPEC is kind of joining BRICS, and not be tied to the American petrodollar, which that's why all of this is so important, is backing the petrodollar and making sure that it stays, so that oil stays kind of high, because that's what our economic system is kind of being propped up by, is that if you want to buy oil, you have to do it in American dollars. Well, in 2024, Saudi Arabia decided that they weren't going to have a complete guarantee of only selling oil in American dollars. And that's going to really hamper things. As you can see, with Iran is very oil rich, but they're also struggling because of all the sanctions, because they have to find ways to sell their oil off the books. One of the things that they got caught with India is they'll transfer oil in the sea from barges or those big mega ships onto another ship, and then sell it over to India or another country. It's kind of like coincidentally the drug trade. If not saying I've ever done this, but if maybe you had to learn how the scanner systems on the airplanes work, and what they're looking for is organic material. So if you can spoof essentially what seems to be, another organic item, and you can hide things in that, and then learn the color scheme of how the scanners work. You can figure that out. So, is there anything else that I wanted to talk about before I play this clip? There was a German woman that I met a few weeks back at the beach, and it was very interesting to talk to her. I started to talk to her, and then she started to get a little bit more comfortable with me. And then I asked her, I said, it's very interesting to me that as you get more comfortable talking to me, I start to hear kind of what your true feelings are. and it's very foreign to me, no pun intended, that you live in a place where you've been trained to not express your true feelings. And even though you're here in America, you're too afraid to express to me what you actually believe. And what was interesting is she eventually started telling me, because I said, it's crazy that your country is still paying off debts to us. And she started to say, well, a lot of people don't really, they know what the truth is about World War II. And I wasn't going to push it too much further, but her being German and saying that I think we both kind of saw eye to eye and knew what the actual topic du jour was at the moment. But this is Michael Parenti. He is the guy that was speaking at the beginning about Grenada, and it really explains that this has been a long issue. This is from C-SPAN in 1991. So remember that it's from 1991. So I'll play a couple of minutes from it. It's an hour-long thing. I really like Michael Parenti, even though he's a socialist. Unfortunately, he's getting really old. It just oddly enough he came into the news maybe a couple months ago. I really hope we're not going to lose him. He's very, very intelligent, even though I don't really go along with everything he says. But a lot of his views, I believe what I think of him is that his views are correct, but his conclusions are not.
Led to untold numbers of wars and conflicts and murders and atrocities. That process is called imperialism. And that process goes on today just as it went on with the Portuguese in Africa and the French and the Dutch and the Belgians and the British. What these nations did in places like Africa, Latin America, Asia, Ireland, India, what they did in impoverishing these countries. The third world is not underdeveloped. It's overexploited. It's been impoverished and plundered to an incredible degree. The tin, the copper, the bauxite, the manganese, the cotton, the cocoa, the rubber, the oil, the silver, the gold, and the labor, and the slaves, and you can go on the list of things that for 500 years the dominant interests of one country, generally Western European, North America, and much later on Japanese, have done to Asia, Africa, and Latin America. That process is still going on today. That process of expropriation. There's very little direct colonization. They no longer own the countries. They just own the economies and control the wealth and much of the infrastructure in these countries. And when a nationalist leader arises, when a leader comes up, be he a Noriega or a Gaddafi or a Saddam Hussein, whatever else he may do, and he may not be a saint, he may have committed any number of crimes of his own, when he has the temerity to begin to interfere with...
Sorry, I had my mic muted. It's very interesting that he said Gaddafi, because obviously this is way before he got taken out, and it's kind of chilling to hear that. And obviously history repeats, and we know the futures of a lot of these people that he just mentioned, which, the cards were on the table.
Things like the price structure of oil, whatever else, to defend his interests and maximize his income at the expense of the multinationals or at the expense of whatever, it doesn't have to be oil, it could be any other thing, then he must be done away with. Even if it's a little tiny country like Grenada. You could say, oh, wait a minute, Grenada isn't an economic threat to the multinationals. What do you got in Grenada? Just nutmeg, and you can always get that nutmeg from Africa. That's right, but the invasion of Grenada and Reagan was right. He said it's not a matter of nutmeg. I said it's the first time I agreed with the guy. It's not for a direct economic interest. It's to serve notice to the people of Grenada that they cannot develop an alternative social order. To serve notice to the people of the Caribbean that if any of you try this, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get the 102nd Airborne on your neck. That stuff, that the labor in your country and the resources of your country and the markets of your country belong to us. You get the hole in the ground, you get the pollution, you get the shanty towns, you get the disease, you get the typhoid and the contaminated water systems, you get the bloated kids, you get the starving people, you get the underemployment, but we skim the cream. And if you try to tamper with that, you will get it. In 1954, when Mossadegh was overthrown after he had nationalized the oil of Iran, he was overthrown by the CIA, which was the whole CIA project in Iran was led by a man named Kermit Roosevelt, who, after the overthrow of Mossadegh, Kermit Roosevelt was then given as his reward a six-figure salary, 1954, with Gulf Oil Company. That was his reward. And at that time in 1954, the New York Times ran an editorial and said, let this serve notice to other nations who get too extreme-minded that the resources and the investments of responsible elements of the world shall be protected. So I don't have the exact quote. I'm sorry, I should have brought it with me. It says it very explicitly, that if you tamper, that oil in your ground belongs to us, and if you touch it, we'll kill you. It's a kind of a national security mafia approach to things. What kind of governments do we want? Not socialist governments, not national self-development governments, not populist reformist governments, not governments of that kind. We want governments, or not we, I mean the ruling interests in this country want governments that are defined as client-state government. A client-state government is a government that's ruled by a comprador class. A comprador class is a class who defines its interests totally as being totally coterminous with the foreign investors. The Al-Sabah family in Kuwait, the Saudi family in Saudi Arabia, who literally expropriate. In fact, they named the country after them.
What's even crazier, I mean, you go into how the Saudis were installed into the power there, but then also it's interesting when a lot of these countries, I was saying, they nationalize and they do reinvest in their countries. Hey, what you doing? All right. What are you doing? Can you go back to mom? I'll be right there. I'll give you a hug. That they don't get troubled for reinvesting in their own people, and that's because they went along with the plan. So I guess I'll end it there because it looks like my daughter's ready to go to bed. So have a good night. I hope that this was informative. I think I got everything off of my chest that I've been wanting to talk about. So until next time, see you later.